Hey, how's it going? In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make this a cell phone stand and to put some nice dovetails on it. You don't want to miss it, so I'll see you in just a second. This cell phone stand has all kinds of uses. You can have your phone vertical or horizontal. You could use it when you're looking at recipes in the kitchen. You can use it when you're on a Zoom call. You can use it when you're wanting to watch something on YouTube. Whatever you want to use it for, this does the trick. The cell phone stand is pretty simple to make. It's going to have a nice dovetail on the back, and that's the main joint in this. And then also, we'll just kind of cut a groove for the cell phone to be able to stay without sliding forward. And that's basically all there is to it. I'll show you how I did it in just a second.
So for this project, I wanted a piece of wood that was about 1/2 inch thick. So I have this one that's just over 1 inch. So I thought I'd just resaw through that and make it into the size that I would need for this project. I came at it from both sides, then used an axe to split it because the cuts didn't line up exactly. And then once I grabbed a piece, it was just using the hand plane to make sure it was completely flat and the proper thickness for the project. This piece is actually long enough that I'm just going to cut it in half and use both halves for the cell phone stand. I'm going to choose which sides I want to put the joint on and then use a marking gauge to measure the depth of one piece, mark it onto the other, and then measure the depth of that piece and put that mark onto the other one. I'm going to start with the tails, and so it means throwing that piece of wood into the vise and marking square lines across the top of the wood. And then once you get the saw going, it's important again to keep it nice and square across that cut. I use a dovetail guide that's going to help me keep the angle right all the way down to the line. And then I just repeat the same process for all the places that I have marked out. So now that the cuts are made, it's time to remove the waste, and I'm just going to mark out the areas I want to remove. And for me, the method I use to do this is by just redefining that line and then paring towards it, and then using a chisel and a mallet to just redefine that line even further with the hammer blow. Then I'm going to continue that process of just paring towards the line, and then coming back with the chisel and mallet, and just repeating that process over and over again. I'll also flip the wood over and just come from both sides to keep the wood supported. And eventually, as you keep going, you'll get deeper and deeper until eventually one of the times you use the chisel and the mallet will actually break through. And so here I've done that, and I just, with my fingers now, remove the rest of the material. And then I'll just come in with a chisel later to see if there's anything that needs to get cleaned up.
When it comes to removing material, there actually are a whole bunch of options that you can choose from. One of the most common is to use a fret saw. But the method that I've chosen is one that I saw demonstrated first by Paul Sellers. I really enjoy the way he works with wood, and for me, this has just been the method I've chosen. But however you want to remove the material, that's up to you.
Removing the material on the side is a little bit easier because all you need to do is saw down to that line. And so that's exactly what we're going to do, sawing down, and then the piece should come right off. We'll flip it over and then just repeat that process. Sometimes when you do this, you'll notice that your original cut wasn't deep enough, and so you might actually have to turn your saw on the side, finish off that cut, and the piece should come out quite nicely. Once you've done that, you can just take a chisel and clean up anything that you missed previously, and then get ready to trace the tails onto the pin board. And to do this, you're going to want to lock it into the vise and make sure everything's secure and lined up. And then what I do is actually just grab a pencil and make some really clear marks around the tails onto the pin board. It's really important that you remember which areas you're actually removing. And I'll take those lines that were on the top and then connect them down to the depth line, throw it back in the vise, and then making sure I'm actually going to be sawing not on the line, but on the waist side of the line. Because I marked it out the way that I did, basically everything that was underneath the tail needs to be removed, which means the lines need to stay. And so that's just kind of the way I do it. There's other ways that you can do it, but I'm going to saw right beside those lines down to that depth line. Once again, we're going to mark out and remove the waist, keeping in mind now that we're not working straight down, but actually at an angle. Otherwise, the process is very similar. We're going to pare towards the line. We're going to use the mallet and the chisel to make the line deeper. And then we're going to do that same thing over and over again. Keeping in mind that we flip and that we're working at an angle, we'll basically do that same thing until eventually we strike through and start removing material. And once we do this, we'll just kind of take out the bulk of it, and then we'll get it in the vise later and clean it up as we start fitting the joint. At this point, it's a matter of making a bunch of small, minor adjustments. First, removing anything you see that's visible, but then once you try to put the tails in, you're going to notice spots that are high, spots that have marks or bruising on them, And I just kind of interchange between trying to get the joint together and then coming back with the chisel and removing any places that are keeping that from happening. This ensures a tight fit because it's always easier to take away material than it is to put material back on. Here we're getting close, just a few final adjustments before finally the joint comes together nicely. Before I glue this together though, I want to mark out where the lip is going to be where the cell phone stands. And I'm going to mark this out with a knife wall, and then similar to the technique we've already been using, I'm going to pare down to that line. And then once I've done that, I'm going to mark out the line a lot deeper with the marking knife and then just continue that process. Just given the way that this joint's going to come together, it would be impossible to get a chisel in here to do this type of thing after it's all glued up. So that's why we're doing it now. Give that section a very light sanding before gluing this thing together. And it's just a matter of getting a bit of glue everywhere, spreading it all around, and just pushing the joint together until there's a little bit of squeeze out that will happen. I'll wipe away any excess glue and then use the clamps to make sure the joint is properly seated before letting it sit for the night. And then once the joint is dried, a hand plane is very nice for making the joint really come to life and look great. And then finally, I'm just going to cut it to length on the front. And once I've done that, we'll be pretty much done.
Well, that's it for now. I was happy with how this came out. I was pleased with the joint, pleased with just the way that it functions as I tested it in different settings. I know I'm going to find a lot of use for this. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to, hit subscribe so you don't miss future videos that come out. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Hope it was helpful. Until next time, take care.